The guest room door had been unlocked while I was out, and the spare key I kept taped inside the laundry cabinet was gone. I noticed it that night because the door didn't catch the way it always did. The hallway light reached farther than usual. I closed it, tested the handle, then went to the cabinet. The tape was still there. The key wasn't. Nothing else in the apartment looked touched. I didn't call anyone. I locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. 2 days later, I met Daniel because my car wouldn't start in the underground garage. I was already late for a board call. I had my laptop bag over one shoulder and my phone pressed to my ear, telling them I'd join audio only. When he came out of the stairwell, he didn't ask if I needed help. He walked straight to the hood, pointed to the dashboard, and told me the battery wasn't dead, just drained. He said it like a fact, not advice. He asked for my key, leaned in, did something I couldn't see, and told me to try again. The engine turned over immediately. He waved off my thanks and said he lived on the 3rd floor, same side as me. He said he worked nights and was usually asleep during the day, which was why he'd noticed my car sitting there longer than usual. He gave me his number without asking for mine and told me to text if it happened again. Then he went back into the stairwell before I could ask anything else. That night he texted first. Just a short message asking if I'd made the meeting. I said yes. He sent back a thumbs up. Nothing else. Over the next week, he kept appearing at moments when something small was off. A package I'd been expecting was misdelivered to his floor. He brought it up already opened, apologized, said the name was close enough that he hadn't looked twice. The smoke detector chirped at 3 in the morning. He knocked 5 minutes later with the replacement battery in his hand. He didn't come in. He stood in the doorway and talked about nothing while I replaced it myself. He never stayed long. That was part of it. He didn't linger or turn things into favors. He made things work and then left. It felt clean. It felt adult. I invited him in for coffee the first time. It was raining, and he'd come up to tell me there was water pooling near my tires. I made the offer without thinking. He accepted without acting like it meant anything. He noticed the layout of my kitchen, asked where I bought the stools, said they fit the space. He didn't comment on the art or the view. He didn't ask what I did for work until I mentioned a deadline. When I told him, he nodded like it explained something he'd already decided. After that, he started texting in the mornings, usually after my first call of the day. Short check-ins. Practical questions. Once he asked if I'd be home late because the building was doing maintenance and they needed access to my unit. He said he could let them in if I wanted. I said no, that I'd handle it. He said okay and didn't push. The spare key came up because I mentioned misplacing one. I told him about the tape in the cabinet, about how I liked having it there in case I locked myself out. He laughed and said that was clever. He said most people hid them in obvious places. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. The first time he stayed over, he brought his own pillow. He said it was a neck thing. He left before dawn and sent a message an hour later telling me I'd left the light on in the living room. I hadn't noticed. By the end of that month, it felt natural to tell him when I was traveling. It felt normal to text him when I landed. It felt efficient to ask him to water the plants because he was already awake when I was asleep. I showed him where I kept the spare linens. I didn't think about the cabinet. When I finally replaced the missing key, I put the new one somewhere else. I didn't tell him where. By the second month, Daniel had a rhythm in my life. Not a loud one. He didn't take over weekends or rearrange my schedule. He fit into the gaps. Early mornings. Late nights. The hours that usually went unused. He knew when not to text. He knew when to show up with food because I'd been in back-to-back calls all day. He didn't ask what I wanted. He brought what made sense. When I traveled, he sent one message each night. Just home. Or landed. If I didn't respond, he didn't follow up. When I did, he replied once and let the thread die. It made it easy to keep him there. It didn't feel like maintenance. He started staying over more often, always midweek. He said weekends were for catching up on sleep. I believed him. He never left anything behind except the pillow. He folded it each morning and put it back in his backpack. He didn't claim space. That mattered to me. The first real shift came quietly. I had an investor dinner downtown that ran late. When I got back, there was a note on the counter. Not romantic, just practical. He'd stopped by to water the plants because it had been unusually warm. He'd noticed the soil was dry. He signed it with his initial like it was a work thing. I hadn't asked him to come up. I didn't ask how he got in. After that, it didn't feel strange when he was already there. Sometimes I'd come home and hear the shower running. Sometimes he'd be at the table with my laptop open. Not logged in, just charging because his battery was dead. He never went into my office. He never touched the locked drawer where I kept personal paperwork. He learned the rules without me having to say them. One night I mentioned offhand that my building manager was unreliable, that I hated coordinating repairs because things always fell through. Daniel listened without comment. The next morning, he forwarded me an email chain with the building office. He'd already confirmed the maintenance window, copied me, and closed the loop. He didn't ask if that was okay. He didn't frame it as help. He just did it. It made my day easier. That was the point. We didn't talk about the future in any dramatic way. There were no declarations. But he started using when instead of if. When I'm back. When this settles down. When you're done with that quarter. It slipped in naturally, attached to logistics. The intimacy stayed physical and practical. Late dinners at home. Falling asleep with the TV on. Him fixing small things without asking. Me leaving cash on the counter when I knew he'd grab groceries on the way up. We never counted it. We never discussed balance. Once I came home early and found him on a call in my living room. He muted himself immediately, stepped into the hallway, closed the door behind him. When he came back, he apologized for being there without asking. He said he needed a quiet place for 10 minutes and didn't think I'd mind. I told him it was fine. And it was. I gave him the new spare key a week later. I didn't make a speech about it. I didn't frame it as trust. I just handed it to him while he was tying his shoes. He looked at it for a second, then tucked it into his wallet. He didn't thank me. He didn't joke. He kissed me once, quick and ordinary, and left. That night, I slept without locking my bedroom door. The third month started with a calendar change I didn't question. I had a 2-week trip scheduled, split between Chicago and San Francisco. Too many meetings, too much movement. I mentioned it while we were eating like it was just another logistical note. Daniel asked for the dates, put them into his phone, and said he'd make sure everything at the apartment stayed quiet. He said it the way someone says they'll take the trash out while you're gone. The night before I left, he cooked. Nothing elaborate. He moved easily in my kitchen, already knowing where everything was. After dinner, he asked where I kept the documents for the unit. Insurance, building notices, that kind of thing. He said if something happened while I was away, he'd want to know who to call. I showed him the folder. It lived on the top shelf of the hall closet. He didn't open it. He just looked at the label and nodded. At the airport the next morning, I realized I'd forgotten my badge for one of the Chicago offices. I texted him without thinking. He replied immediately, said he'd look for it. By the time I boarded, he'd sent a photo of it on my desk. He said he'd overnight it. I told him not to bother, that I'd manage. He said okay, but the badge was waiting for me when I got back anyway. While I was gone, he sent photos of the plants. Short updates. No commentary. He mentioned the building had emailed about a fire inspection and that he'd already confirmed access. He forwarded the notice. My name was still on everything. It didn't feel like a handover. It felt like coverage. When I got back, the apartment smelled faintly different. Clean, but not the way I usually did it. He'd washed the sheets and put them back on the bed. He said he wasn't sure which setting I preferred, so he'd chosen the middle one. He said it like a report. That weekend, he asked if I'd ever considered putting the utilities on autopay. He said the building had sent another reminder that it might be easier if payments didn't depend on my travel schedule. I told him I already had most things automated. He asked which ones weren't. I told him. He said he could set it up if I wanted. I said I'd do it later. Later came sooner than I expected. A week after that, I had a morning that unraveled fast. Call that went long. A missed connection. An inbox filling faster than I could clear it. Daniel was already at the apartment when I got home, sitting at the table with my laptop closed in front of him. He told me the building needed confirmation for emergency access while I was traveling again the following month. He said it was a formality, but the manager wanted a second contact listed. He slid the form across the table. My name was already filled in. His was blank. He said it would just make things smoother. That it didn't change anything. That it was temporary. He said the word temporary twice like punctuation. I read it. It wasn't complicated. It didn't transfer ownership. It didn't touch my accounts. It named him as an authorized contact for the unit in case I was unreachable. It looked like the kind of thing people did without thinking. I signed it. He took a photo and emailed it to the building before I could change my mind. He kissed my forehead, told me to shower, said he'd order dinner. By the time I came back into the kitchen, the form was already filed away in the closet, back on the top shelf. I didn't ask why he'd needed it so quickly. That night, he stayed over even though it was a weekend. He didn't bring the pillow. In the morning, he left early. He texted once to say the inspection was confirmed and that I didn't need to worry about it anymore. I believed him. After that, things stopped flowing and started arriving. Messages came at odd hours, clipped and informational. The tone didn't change all at once. It thinned. He still showed up, but not the way he had before. He'd be there when something needed doing. He'd be gone when it didn't. I noticed first because the plants were watered differently. Too much in some pots, not enough in others. He said the light had changed, that he was adjusting. I accepted it. It wasn't worth correcting. The building inspection happened while I was in Seattle for 3 days. I didn't hear from him during it. When I got back, there was a printed notice on the counter saying everything was compliant. His handwriting wasn't on it. I didn't ask if he'd been there. He stopped staying over during the week. He said his schedule had shifted. Night work had turned into early mornings. He still came by, usually when I wasn't home. I knew because the apartment felt used in small ways. A chair moved. A window cracked. The trash taken out when I hadn't touched it. Once I came home and found the guest room door open. The bed was made. Not the way I did it. Hospital corners. Taut. The pillowcases didn't match the set I kept in that room. They were his. The same brand he used on his pillow. He said he'd taken a call and needed a flat surface to spread things out. He said he hadn't slept there. I didn't check. The building started copying him on emails. At first it was just maintenance notices. Then reminders. Then a notice about an upcoming plumbing project that would require access to the unit during business hours for a full week. I replied to confirm my availability. The manager replied only to Daniel, thanking him for coordinating. I forwarded it back to myself so I wouldn't forget. He told me he'd be out of town for a bit. Not a trip. Just away. He didn't say where. He said coverage was arranged. He used that word. Coverage. Like the apartment was a shift that needed filling. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions that would have turned it into something else. We were already in a different mode. I could feel it. Conversations ended instead of trailing off. Touch was brief, efficient. The night before the plumbing work started, he came by unexpectedly. He stood in the doorway with his backpack on, didn't take his shoes off. He said he needed to check something. He went straight to the hall closet, reached for the top shelf, and pulled down the folder with the building documents. He flipped through it quickly. Too quickly. He put it back and told me everything was fine. I asked him what he was checking for. He said alignment. I let that sit. That week, while the plumbers were in and out, I worked from home. Or tried to. There were moments when they'd say they'd already been cleared by the secondary contact. They said it casually, like it saved time. On the third day, I couldn't get into my own parking spot. There was a vehicle parked there with a temporary permit taped to the dash. I called the building office. They told me it was authorized. They said Daniel had arranged it. I stood there longer than I needed to, looking at the permit. It had his name on it, not mine. When I texted him, he replied an hour later. He said it was temporary. He said it would be easier this way until the work was done. He said I shouldn't worry. That night I slept on the couch because the bedroom smelled like dust and chemicals. The guest room door was closed. I didn't open it. By the time the plumbing work ended, Daniel was no longer something I scheduled around. He was something the building referenced. I found out because the manager called me directly for the first time in months. She asked if Daniel was still the best point of contact. She said it casually, like she was confirming an email address. I told her I was the owner and that she should call me. She apologized and said of course. Then she asked if I wanted Daniel copied anyway, since he'd been handling things so efficiently. I said no. After that, the apartment felt tighter. Not smaller. More defined. Like certain paths were now preferred. Certain drawers opened more easily than others. I started noticing which lights were on when I got home, which ones were off. Patterns that weren't mine. I checked the hall closet one evening when he wasn't there. The folder was thinner. Not empty. Just edited. Some notices gone. Others rearranged. The emergency contact form was still there, on top like a cover page. He came by later that night without texting. He let himself in while I was on a call. I muted and watched him move through the kitchen, open the fridge, close it again. He sat at the table and waited. He didn't look at me. He looked at the clock. When I hung up, I asked him to give me the spare key back. He didn't argue. He didn't ask why. He took his wallet out, set it on the table, opened it. The slot where I'd seen the key before was empty. He said he must have left it upstairs. He said he'd bring it by tomorrow. Tomorrow came and went. He texted once to say he was busy. The day after that, he didn't reply at all. That was when I tried to change the locks. The building told me I couldn't without approval. They said the secondary contact had already flagged an issue with access continuity during the recent work, and that changes would need to be coordinated. They said Daniel had requested a delay. They said it was for safety. I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand and looked at the door. It was the same door. Nothing visible had changed. I emailed the manager. I didn't copy him. I asked to remove him as a contact immediately. I asked for confirmation in writing. The reply came an hour later, polite and firm. They said they'd need his acknowledgement as well, since he was currently listed as authorized for access-related matters. I forwarded the email to him. He replied late that night. Just a sentence. He said he was out of town. He said we could sort it out when he got back. He added that I was overreacting. The next morning, the guest room door was open again. The bed was unmade this time. Not slept in. Used. The window was open a few inches, even though it was cold. On the desk, where I never put anything, there was a stack of papers. Copies. Building notices. Parking permits. A printed version of the emergency access form with notes in the margin. His handwriting. At the bottom of the stack was a key. Not mine. It was the building master for temporary contractors. The kind that opened common areas in specific units during approved windows. There was a tag attached with a date range written on it. The range ended that day. I sat there for a long time before I moved anything. When I finally did, I put the papers back in the order I'd found them. I closed the window. I locked myself into the bedroom and waited for my phone to ring. It didn't. The next contact didn't come from him. It came from the building's legal office. The email was short and formal. It said there had been an internal review of access coordination during the recent maintenance period. It said discrepancies had been noted. It said they were temporarily suspending my ability to authorize changes to entry protocols until the review concluded. For efficiency, they said, all communication would go through the existing secondary contact. They copied Daniel. I read it twice. Then I checked the timestamp. It had been sent an hour earlier. I called immediately. I didn't reach anyone. I left a message that stayed polite longer than it should have. I asked for a callback. I didn't mention his name. When I hung up, I noticed the apartment was too quiet. Not empty. Managed. The front door was locked. So was the guest room. The bedroom door, the one I'd locked the night before, was open. On the dresser, my passport wasn't where I kept it. Not gone. Just moved. It was stacked with a folder I hadn't seen before. Inside were copies of my travel itineraries. Old ones. Some from months back. Printed emails. Notes in the margins. Dates circled. My phone buzzed while I was standing there. A text. From him. He said the building had overreacted. He said he was handling it. He said it would be cleaner if I didn't intervene until things were clarified. He said I'd made it harder by escalating. I didn't reply. I packed a bag. Not carefully. Just enough. I tried to leave through the garage. My access card didn't work. The gate stayed down. A security guard told me my vehicle was temporarily restricted due to an ongoing access review. He said my contact would explain. I went back upstairs and called a car. When I came back that night, the apartment smelled wrong again. Not clean. Lived in. The guest room door was open. The bed was stripped. The linens were gone. The desk was clear except for one thing. My spare key. The old one. The one that had disappeared first. It was taped to the surface with the same kind of tape I used in the cabinet. Neat. Centered. Like it was being returned to its place. There was a note under it. One line printed, not handwritten. Everything that mattered needed consistency. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the key until it warmed in my hand. By the end of the week, the building restored my access. They apologized for the confusion. They said there had been a misunderstanding about roles. Daniel's name was removed from the file. They said they hadn't been aware we were no longer together. They asked if I wanted to file a complaint. I said no. The locks were changed the following Monday. All of them. I watched the technician work. I didn't leave the room. When it was done, he handed me a small envelope with the new keys. He asked if there was anyone else who needed a copy. I said no. That night, I walked through the apartment and closed every door. The guest room last. I put the envelope in the back of the closet on the floor, behind a box I hadn't opened in years. The spare key never went back on the wall.